you know, we still need the stories, whether we read modern novels or not. It's like, we need that connection, whether it's with our elders or with our kids. We pass these stories on as something precious. For me personally, it's probably just the unknown. I've always been drawn more to the unknown and whatever the beyond of normal life. So I would actually go out and look for these. We would go to haunted houses. We would go to haunted areas of the cities, see what was going on. Yeah. Now, whatever that comes from, I don't know, but it kept life interesting.
It was almost like an escape.
Definitely an escape. Family life was not a happy life, so that was an escape. Oh, definitely.
Hey, welcome to the Floaties for Krakens podcast. I am your host, Camille Maria Costa, and it is a brilliant day to be monstrous. Hi, Cuddlefish. Hi, how are you? Hopefully well, hopefully amazing, hopefully thriving, and if not, that is okay, because we're all just out here trying our best, right? So that's the whole point of this. Well, hi. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Man, we are flying through season 2, aren't we? It's so exciting. Oh my gosh, just such amazing, inspirational people every single week. It gets me excited. It gets me, I don't know, just pumped and thrilled, and I don't know, just looking forward to the future of the show. I feel like it's amazing, and it's already grown so much since last year. So thank you for being here. Or if this is your first time, right? Hi, nice to meet you. We like to talk about monsters on the show. I assume that's why you're here. Um, or if not, hi, welcome. We welcome all kinds of people here. Um, Today's episode is so amazing and brilliant. Just so fun. I felt like I was just so giddy and we were just chatting like young schoolgirls, because I know me and this person bond so hard over talking about horror and all the creepy stuff and all the fun stuff, and I'm just so excited to introduce to you all Dr. Orquidea Morales. And not in my own words, but Dr. Orquidea Morales is an assistant professor in the School of Theater, Film, and Television at the University of Arizona. Her work on border violence, Latina media, and horror has been published in journals such as Film Quarterly and Flow. Her works looks at the intersection of Latina studies and horror studies, and she is currently working on a manuscript that traces the movement of La Llorona in Mexican and US film. Amazing. Morales also hosts a podcast, shout out, with Brenda Salguero in Monstras. Morales and Salguero discuss Latinx and Latin American folklore legends, true crime, and all things spooky. It's an amazing show. I'm linking it down below. Gosh, this Orquidea is just so amazing. I just fangirl all the time talking to her, and she's literally it's just so amazing, and teaching such cool classes and courses that are so important for students to learn and for people to learn. Just that intersectionality between horror and Latina experiences and stories and narratives and the human experience. It's just amazing. Orquidea, you're incredible. I hope you know that, and just so deserving of where you are, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for you, because you're gonna just rock this world. And like I said before, when you make a movie one day, please call me, because I would love to be your coffee runner at the very least, because I know it's gonna be amazing. But yeah, just thank you for being on the show and changing my world, and I'm excited. I'm just so excited for this. I can't be any more thrilled. Today's episode just so you all know, there is some tough conversations in it, some tough discussions. There's mentions of racism in the US and in the world at large. There is mentions of sexual assault and sexual abuse, the sexualization of female bodies, the exploitation of female bodies, and body horror as well. So, yeah, just protect yourself. Listen carefully and safely with somebody if you need to. Um, but yeah, either way, I think today's conversation is just amazing. Just so freaking amazing. Ladies and cuttlefish, let me introduce to you Machetes and Red Lipstick for Las Final Girls.
This
Well,
is really cool.
hi, Orquidea again.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. I feel like I have a new toy in front of me. I've never used Sandcaster, so I'm just like, ooh, it's moving. I can see it. It's pretty cool.
Listen, it's really cool. And I think I really wish I had this or I knew about it during the pandemic because I feel like it's so helpful for long distance interviews or like just anything. You know what I mean? Important Zoom calls that you want to record or navigate. You can even like do transcriptions on here. It's very, very cool. I highly
Nice.
recommend this platform.
Nice. Cool. Thank you for
Yeah.
introducing me to it.
No, anytime. Anytime. So how have you been? How's everything?
Good. I'm surprisingly excited for spring. Spring's here, and usually I'm a fall girl. I do not like the
Yes.
heat, but
Yeah.
living in
Yes.
Arizona now, like the flowers are just blooming and it actually feels like spring and it's nice.
Beautiful. That's so good. I no, I'm like you. I think especially when living in very hot places, it can be like, oh God, here we go. It's time.
Yeah.
But there's something about transitioning seasons, spring and fall, I think, that just make you feel alive again, make you feel reinvigorated, and if anybody out there hasn't experienced like a Southwest spring, you should. It's lovely. It's
It
it's
really
really
is
lovely.
amazing. Yeah. I think growing up in South Texas, I didn't get to experience spring because it was cold and then it was hot.
Just
And
immediately.
yes. And here it feels like, oh, we're getting some 60-degree weather and flowers are
Yeah.
popping up and it's pretty
Yes.
beautiful. Yeah, it's disgusting.
Good. I hate it. I hate that we're
hate
so
it so
happy.
much. Yeah. It doesn't
I
work with
love
my goth
that.
aesthetic.
That is true. People don't realize how hard it is to keep up a goth aesthetic when it like changes seasons.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It really is.
It's very complicated, but it's okay. I feel like that just pushes your creativity to be like, okay, how can I make spring and summer as monstrous as possible?
That's
um
true.
it's fun. It gives you a run for your money.
Yeah. Inspirational, it's true.
There you go. Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, Orquídea and I first met, gosh, recently, really. When we, I don't even know if is it a secret? I don't
I don't
know.
think so.
I don't think it's a secret, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's something very special that's going to be published really soon. And I will link the publication and everything like that. We had the wonderful chance to sit basically in at a round table and talk about a monster that's very, very near and dear, I think, to both of us. And it was fun. It was like a really cool experience. It was virtual, of course, but I'm hoping one day we can all meet in person and talk about this monster in person.
It
But
was yeah, it was surreal 'cause I mean, we were talking to scholars that I've cited, that I've read and admire, and it was just like fangirling hella hard and then talking about a cool monster. So, yeah.
it was great. It was like, talk about reinvigorating. I feel like it's really inspiring to see not only people you look up to just be so kind and like be so human, but I think to also see that they struggled with similar things that you and I have like been experiencing or been figuring out as we grow in this adult world.
Mm.
I think that was very nice to see. And it was cool to see those parallels and also to see how they overcame very complex things. It was just such a cool experience.
Yeah.
Point blank period. It was so fun.
Yeah. And I think the publication comes out June or July, I think,
June or
something
July. I
like
think you're
that.
right.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
Academic
crossed.
publications are always slow, but
They're tough. Yes, they are so tough.
yeah,
Shout out to Kimmy. You're
gosh.
doing amazing work, especially with all of us in different parts of the country. So it's so exciting. I'm so excited to see the final product. Seeing the rough edit was very cool. Um,
Yeah.
it's just going to be cool. And I'm all that being said, I was so excited to meet you, and see all the wonderful, freaking amazing stuff that you do. So, for people that may not know you, who are you? What do
Oh,
you do? What are your passions in life? All the good things.
so I never know how to introduce myself because I'm
That's
so
okay.
used to like academic introductions. And but I don't want that to be my full identity. So okay. So Orquidea Morales, I
Respect.
was born in Mexico but raised in South Texas. So I'm a 956 girl.
Hey.
Uh and I love, love, love all things horror. Like I've been watching horror since I was a baby, so for as long as I can remember. And I was also lucky enough to grow up around weird stuff. So I grew up like one of my aunts did brujeria, so she would do the tarot reading and she would do candles and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so it was like normal for me. Like I just grew up with that, and it just I wanted to
Yes.
do that. So like it inspired me to go into psychology because that's how I saw it. I'm like, oh, she's a therapist with cool
Yes.
stuff, so I want to do that too. So like I've always been around weirdness or what other people would consider weird, and it just for me it never felt that way.
Yeah.
And then when I figured out I could do this for a living, like I could write and teach about horror and weird stuff, that just was like, yeah, of course that's what I'm gonna do. It's so amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm a assistant professor at University of Arizona, where I teach Latino media classes, horror media classes. So the connection between the two.
The dream.
Yeah, it kind of is. The students really make my life so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for the
Oh,
grading. The grading always sucks, but the students are amazing.
I mean, I don't know how you all do it. Just week in and week out, you see hundreds of students at any given moment, and it's hard. Like, teaching is just so hard. If you've never done it before, it is wild. It is a wild thing. But I think I think it makes me so thrilled that students have the opportunity not only to learn from you, which is just sick in itself, but like have a class like that. Like when I was going to school, if I had a class like that, forget about it. That sounds so fun. Like so cool. Really
Yeah,
cool concept.
thank you. And I think it's, I feel like I'm tricking students because, like, we start off talking about horror, and next thing you know, we're talking about, social injustice or, the
Mm,
patriarchy. Like,
mm.
horror is such a great way to have those difficult conversations. Like, the genre just allows it. So I always feel like I'm doing a bait and switch. Like, we're going to talk about horror, psych, we're talking about real shit now.
No, but like I don't know. I mean, and maybe that's just our experiences as BIPOC individuals, but like they're interchangeable. I feel like, or one can't exist without the other, and that's kind of always how I've known it. And it sounds like your experiences too have been similar, right? Like there's, I don't know, it's easier to digest, as you mentioned. It's easier to talk about very complex things when it's like, oh yeah, I'm just getting scared. It's fine. It's just scared. It's scary, right? But some of the most brilliant films that have taught us about the parallels in our society and what's going on in the world have been horror, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
no,
I think
exactly.
it's brilliant. Yeah. That's so cool. Oh, okay. And so for people that may not know Orquídea, what is brujeria? Um, that people that may have never heard that word before.
So brujeria is like witchcraft, but it's different in that it usually mixes like curanderismo, so like folk healing practices and
Yes.
herbalism and things like that. So it mixes that with Catholicism, along with like some other spiritual beliefs. So, for
Mhm.
example, my tia believed in Santa Muerte, which is kind of like a newer saint, right? But
Mhm.
it's also
Yes.
like a in between saint. You
Oh
get
my
that there?
gosh.
Uh,
Who is that?
that's Pazuzu, because The Exorcist. um,
I cannot have. Are you kidding? Hi, Pazuzu.
there she is.
Hello. Orquidea,
she's
that's incredible.
she's very friendly, but yeah, her name's Pazuzu. We love her.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh. She has perfect timing. She knew what you were talking about.
She did. She's like, "New camera, I'm on it."
I'm
Monsters, yes.
there. Somebody said brujeria.
Yeah, you need a black cat.
Of course. It just goes hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I
But
didn't mean
yeah,
to interrupt you. I saw an
no,
animal, got excited. So
yeah, but yeah, that's what brujeria is. So it's kind of like a syncretic mix of a lot of different belief systems that kind of create new practices. Yeah,
and your Thea studied, practiced, did all of this,
yeah, and
correct?
it's one of those things like so it's on my mom's side of the family, and they believe that it's kind of like a gift.
Yeah,
So my tia had it, and I think like some of my grandfather's like sisters had it, so it was like through his side.
yeah.
And then like we had a crystal ball at some point. Like it was
Yes,
wild. It
yes.
was wild. Like thinking back, it was again, it was just there, and like the assumption was we would all have gifts, right? Like so, like I should be able to read tarot cards or whatever the case might be. So
Right.
from like a really young age, like when I was in the room with folks, they would rub my head and try to get like energy from me and
Oh,
stuff like that.
yes.
So there was like
Yes.
all of that was just constantly happening. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's so what a moment. Like I don't know. I feel like that's so incredible. How did you feel in terms of like were you hoping to kind of experience the world the same way that other brujerias before you like felt, Or how did you feel about the world of
So
curanderismo?
much so. Yeah, like so I wanted to be a bruja. I wanted to
Yeah.
help people because that's how I saw it. Like she's helping people. Um
Yeah.
and it was like a lot of working class folks and some wealthy folks, but there was just a lot of people that needed help. So I was like,
Yeah.
that's what I want to do. I want to help them. Like I want to help people. So that's how I saw it. Like and at the same time, like I wanted because we everyone assumed that her house was haunted, right? Because she works with
Of
that sort of
course.
stuff. So,
Yeah.
like my cousins were like, I saw La Mujer de Blanco or the Woman in White, and or I saw this and I saw that, and I'm like so jealous because when am I gonna see a ghost? When
Like
is
I'm
it my
ready.
turn? Yeah. So like I was always jealous that I didn't see anything. But story goes that one of the reasons I didn't see stuff is because when I was born, my mom wanted to protect me and they could sense that I had some special power. So they went to a curandera and they bound me. So they used like red string to bind me so that I wouldn't be able to see as many things as other people, so that I couldn't kind of be connected to that spiritual side.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, as a way to protect me, because yeah,
Yeah.
like they believe that like it's weird, like, I've had, like, adults when I was a child be like, "Can you put your hands on me and heal me?" So, like, I've done that, and
Yeah.
that's strange because it it feels like you have more power than you understand what it means when you're a child. So it's kind of a weird position, but I think
Yeah.
it also taught me a lot about the world and kind of how I see myself in it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my gosh. And you're right. I mean, that's so much, even if you don't really truly understand what's going on, that's so much responsibility at that age. You're like, oh gosh, somebody's in pain. You know what I mean? I better do everything I can to make them feel better.
yeah.
And I can totally understand your mother's perspective of I just don't want her to see anything terrifying, to feel anything terrifying. I totally understand that. but I'm just like you. I've been like, Mom,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Well, can we
what the
cut that
heck?
string? I want to see some ghosts. I want to see
Just
some
a little
spooky
bit.
things. Yeah. I want to
Come
get
on.
those like glasses from 13 Ghosts so that I can just like every once in a while see them. That's what I
Yeah,
want.
just when you want
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. I
Cause
like I don't want to see them when I'm in the bathroom. Like that's not,
no,
but if I'm chilling in the bedroom, like I might want to see a ghost.
yeah, if you're having a rough day, you might want some advice or something along those lines, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's beautiful. And I definitely think you have it. I think no matter what, that gift is yours. It is there. I feel like I've heard of a lot of different individuals being bound as well
Mhm.
at a young age, but I don't know. I mean, sometimes like you're needed in a different plane in a lot of circumstances. So either way, I think it's amazing
Thank
that
you.
you're a part of that. You know
Thank
what I mean?
you.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad, I mean, as far as I know, no one in our family, but I know my dad grew up next to a curandera
Nice.
in Chihuahua, in Para Chihuahua, Mexico. And everybody, similar thing. Everybody went to her, everybody knew her.
Mhm.
Um, you never speak badly of her, you do not harm her in
Yeah.
any way. Um, and she had all the utmost respect. Um,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Everywhere. So I love that. I think it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it
So
was wild. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, kind of like my relationship to my aunt and my relationship to the spiritual through her. Cause
yeah.
like yeah, like people treated her really well and loved her and respected and feared her. But at the
Mm.
same time, she had a child out of wedlock in the late 70s with a married man. So
Wow.
she was ostracized for those reasons. So it was weird to kind of see both of those things happening. Like people wanted her
Mm.
help, but at the same time, there would be the whispers or there would be the gossip because of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So like that, yeah, that was always ridiculous to me. It's like y'all
Of
are getting
course.
help.
I know.
Stop.
Be quiet. What are
Yeah,
you talking? It's not your life.
yeah,
Get over it.
exactly.
Golly. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's wild. And
but
then you're right. I think I don't know. There's just so many other things we can talk about. I feel like with your aunt and this idea of femininity and the devious femme, right? Whatever that
mhm,
means, right? Of like a woman not doing what she's supposed to do, right? So much pressure. There's Marianismo. Like we could
mhm,
talk about it all day of like the
yeah,
different layers of what she probably experienced.
yeah.
Um,
But I think
you
like that's
know?
why I'm fascinated with monstrous women. It's kind of like the brujeria didn't make her monstrous, but
Hmm.
having sex out of wedlock did. And that to me is like,
Yes.
really? That's wild.
Yep. Yep. It is insanely wild. It's
Yeah.
absolutely wild. And that's why I love the word monstrous so much, because there are so many different levels to it, and it depends whose mouth it's coming out of. It depends who they're calling that to, right? There's a lot of power in that, and it can be very painful,
Yeah.
incredibly painful.
Yeah.
You know, and I know you were saying too, you were like monsters have just always been around. Were there any monsters that you also grew up like legends and stories, but being Mexican, right, that you grew up listening to or hearing that like really stuck with you as well?
So there was La Llorona for sure. So the
Of
weeping
course.
woman or the wailing woman. There was also the woman in white, which was semi-similar. It was kind of just like a spirit woman that would take children away.
Right.
Um, so those El Cucuy,
Of course.
yeah. So it's like a boogeyman. Um, there's also I like the devil stories. So like if
Oh,
you
yes.
misbehave, the devil's gonna come pull your feet at night or like stuff like that. So I always imagined him just like sneaking around, very like a caricature, because like who you're the devil and all you can do is pull people's feet. Like
That's it. I'll dance with you even if you give me the chance, but
that's
that's it.
that's true. Like he must really like feet. Like he must love to watch people
Same.
dance. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
That's his thing. That's it. That's on his resume. That's it.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so kind of the traditional ones, and then what I would do. So I loved reading growing up. I loved it. So I would read a lot from a
Yeah.
very young age, and I would read a lot of creepy stuff because I could. And so what I would do is that,
Obviously.
right, like what else are you gonna read?
Yeah.
So I would terrify my cousins. So I would create stories borrowing from like Fear Street or like scary stories, and then mix it with like La Llorona, or mix it with like our home house, like the architecture of our house, and be like, here in the boiler room there's this or that, obviously. So I would just mix all sorts of things and create monsters, and it was always so much fun. And they're still, it turns out, they like, some of my cousins were like traumatized by it. They're terrified. Yeah, I feel
That's so
bad, but at the
funny.
same time, it was so much fun.
You were having the best time of your life.
I was building worlds with them.
You were building worlds. You were building your future. You were finding what you liked. You were no. Shout out, shout out. I think I relate to you so much on this. Shout out to the primos and primas that stood by us when we were terrifying the crap out of them as little kids. Literally, Orquidea, I remember this like it was yesterday. When I was very little, I really wanted to make a haunted house, like
Mm,
at my grandparents' house, so bad. I was like, this is going to be so amazing. And my older cousin Santina, it was both of us. And we were like, all right, cool. We're going to make the scariest haunted house. We're going to scare everybody. So we went into the garage, right? And we literally, like, I don't even know what it was not scary. Let me just say that. It was like we hung like sheets and like tried to make it darker than it actually was. And then like put random bowls of food so that people could feel it,
yeah,
and be
yeah.
like, ooh, is this guts and things
Worms.
like
Ew.
yes. And like one flashlight, it was very, I mean, we didn't, balling on a budget. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
And I literally remember, of course, like the first people to go in there were all the boy cousins. And they were like, this is so stupid. Like, this isn't even scary or whatever. And we could hear them. So I decided, because I was so mad, because we worked so hard on this,
Yeah.
so stupid. I opened the door, I threw a basketball in there, and I was like, I hope this scares you, and then ran away. And then they ended up crying, and I got in huge trouble because the basketball hit one of them and they fell into the food, and it was like really bad.
That's adorable. Wait, how old were you when that happened?
God, I was probably like 8 or 9,
That's so
trying my
cute.
best.
Let me terrify you. Let me scare you.
Yeah, it's like, Camille, that's assault. That's not that's not
Amongst
what we're trying.
cousins, no.
You're right. We've been doing much worse. Please. I should have been the one getting in trouble. Okay. I was scaring them straight. All right.
Exactly. They had to
God.
they should have respected the work that went into it. Come on now.
Respect the game. Okay.
Exactly.
Jeez Louise.
That's
No, I
adorable.
thank you. Thank you for thinking so. I'm
Yeah,
sure we would have been great friends
I
growing up.
think so too. We would
God.
have made a lot of trouble.
We would have been excommunicated probably from our neighborhood because we would have been so freaky.
Oh my
But
gosh.
that's
We
okay.
would have been Los Spookies. We would have been Los Spookies. Set up a business to
Literally
terrify.
my dream. My
Yes.
freaking dream. Oh my gosh. Oh, literally.
Yeah.
Literally. Speaking of Los Spookies, but just like thinking about this world of media, right, and horror and things of that nature, you also, and I think it's on a rest right now, but you also have a spooky podcast. Isn't that correct,
We
Orquídea? Do you mind
do.
talking about that?
Yeah. So we started a podcast, Brenda Salguero and I, a friend and I,
Yeah.
um, a few years ago, and we had it for about 3 years. It's called Monstras, and we talk about
Yes.
Latin American, Latino folklore, horror, weird, true crime, everything,
Yeah.
from a feminist perspective. Um, so that was always fun. Yeah, so we're starting recording again in April. We're hoping to release in
Yes.
October. Thank you.
Yes. I love your show. It's a great show.
Yeah.
I'll link it down below too so people can
Oh,
listen.
awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's
Yeah, I
great.
it's a lot of fun and it's kind of a way for us to talk about stuff that we like and we don't usually get to talk about in just kind
Yeah.
of a conversational way. Like for me, it feels like it's work, so it has to be academic and that gets boring. So it's nice to just
Yeah.
chill and talk about it. Yeah,
Yes.
and I think so this new we're gonna do seasons and this next season is gonna be kind of my season and then it's going to be Brenda. So we get to choose different themes and mine is going to be on monstrous women. And we're going to explore
Yes.
different monstrous women that have shaped us. So a little
Period.
teaser, we're definitely going to talk about Ursula. So we're going to talk about non-Latinas that have shaped Latinas, Ursula being one of them. So yeah, that's in the works right now. Super excited because I freaking love Ursula. So yeah,
Come on now. Ursula, literally the most beautiful, badass Disney villain. Um,
honestly, yeah.
God, one of the best songs. Just incredible. We love her.
I hate
We
what they
love
did to the song in the remake or in the new live action. Like they took out the best parts and made it
Yeah.
just like boring.
Because it's her. Like she just she envelops literally with her tentacles. Like
Yeah.
every angle of that song and she's just so you see the evilness, but like evil in the sense of like of course, right? Like she's against Ariel, so like as a kid you're like, "Oh, yeah, she's bad."
Yeah.
But yet so stunning. One of the best outfits ever. The lipstick moment, right? Like she's it's so powerful. Um and to the point where yes, she's very like of course stealing a person's voice sure, not consensually. Yeah, well, it's a little
It
it's a
was a
little
contract.
there was a
There's a
contract.
gray area there.
You're absolutely freaking right. There was a contract. Um, right? So there's like a lot of aspects to look at it in. But like, I don't know, that final battle with her and her brother. Well,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like I know it's like with Prince Eric and Ariel and stuff, but like, the undertones of like her always competing with her brother and him always being perfect and masculine and getting everything. He's the good person, um and like she was born with tentacles, she was born different, she was
Yeah.
right, like there's so much beautiful stuff you could talk about.
Yeah. Well, and her inability or unwillingness to have children too. Like he has children to give the kingdom
Yes.
to. She doesn't. So she's like
Mm-mm.
she's dead, right? Like what is the point of her if she doesn't have um what is it called? Descendants.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
she's cast away,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah. So she's fascinating. I love her. So that's in the works and we're excited
That's
to be back. Yeah.
I can't wait. That's gonna be so great. And of course premiering in October, what better time?
Yeah. We're like, we need some more time. Let's just do it October. We need spooky season
Yes.
time.
Come on,
Yeah.
get yes. And like I already know this is gonna be, I mean, I say this every year, a great year in movies for horror and stuff. But I think y'all are gonna have a lovely season. I think there's gonna be so many great women in monstrosity to talk about. So it's
Thank
gonna be great.
you. Yeah, I love me some monstrous women, so I'm excited.
Speaking of monstrous, I'm very excited to ask you this question, Orquidea. In your words, thoughts, what do you think is a monster?
A monster is something that makes us uncomfortable and that elicits fear because of that discomfort, is how I would define it. Um, yeah. I don't want to describe it physically because a monster can mean like physically can look like so many different things.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I do think a monster is defined based on who we are and what terrifies us. So it's culturally, it changes, and geographically it changes. So that's the
Yeah.
beauty of the monster. It's just undefinable, but when you feel it, you're terrified, and that's how you know, like that's a monster.
Yes. Which perhaps makes it even more frightening, the fact that it ebbs and flows and changes, perhaps to what terrifies you,
Mhm.
or terrifies other people. And I love that. I think uncomfortability is such a big part of it. Such a big part of it, right? This idea that it's outside of the norm,
Mm,
whatever that norm is. Um, and that unsettles people. And you're right. It can shapeshift. It could look like anything. It
yeah.
really could.
And that's what, like, I don't want to define it in a negative way, because I
Yes.
don't think monsters are inherently negative or inherently dangerous. I
Yeah.
think change is terrifying, and monsters are all about change and are all about mutations.
Mm,
So it's
mm,
normal to feel fear, but it's not necessarily fear of the monster, it's fear of the change or fear of hybridity, fear of whatever it symbolizes.
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Brilliant point. Absolutely. Change um, elicits a lot of fear. It can be very terrifying. Anything, right? Like changing your coffee order one day, right? Can make you
Yeah.
feel, oh no, like I'm not used to this, right? Or a big move, or going to a new neighborhood where people look at you like you're different because you're the change, right? Like there are
Mm,
so many different ways to look at that. Um, but also, as you mentioned, it's not inherently bad sometimes, right? It's change can be a beautiful thing.
yeah.
Um, you can grow from it. And again, even though that makes people uncomfortable, there's a lot of growth in change. But arguably, the only growth that can happen is in change. So,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like otherwise we're just stagnant, right? So if we don't experience some sort of change, we're not we're not learning, we're not growing, we're not living. So, yeah.
no, you got to thrive in that uncomfortability. You
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
As hard as it may be sometimes, you have to. Yeah. Okay. Well, then, Orquidea, who is the final girl?
So this is where it gets complicated. I picked the final girl as a monster, but I know it's not a monster. So, okay. But
I'm
I don't.
excited.
I make things more complicated than they need to be. The final girl is a theory that was created by Carol Clover to talk about how in the 70s and 80s we saw more women surviving horror films, specifically slashers, specifically in the
Mhm,
US, specifically white
mhm,
women. So there's a lot
mhm.
of like kind of narrowing down of her ideas. But she argued that what was happening was, we what she called a final girl. Girls were surviving till the end of the film, and that people were seeing this as a feminist switch in horror. That this was actually about female empowerment because women were surviving. Carol Clover argues, nah. What it actually means is that there's a reinstatement of the patriarchy in the end of these films. It's just the woman represents patriarchy instead of
Oh,
the male monster. So, for example, in Halloween, you have Mike Myers versus Laurie Strode,
right.
and for the first part of the movie, you're kind of identifying with Mike Myers. You see the world through his eyes. You can kind of hear the breathing, all that sort of fun stuff. But then, as the movie kind of progresses, you start to see the world through Laurie's eyes. So you're asked to identify with her. She argues that most of the audiences for horror were men, so this was kind of like a cross gender identification where they were being asked to identify with the female lead, Laurie. But she's like, at the end of the movie, we see Laurie gain the phallus. So she uses a knife, she uses the knitting needle, right? So she
Mm,
uses weapons that are phallic to punish
right.
Mike Myers or to kill Mike Myers. And by doing
Oh,
so, the abnormal one is defeated and we reinstate um, like heteronormative perfection. So
mm,
that's kind of how she's not a feminist figure. It really is about like punishing women that are not normative. So all the women that have sex die, all the women that,
yeah.
kind of don't fit into an ideal die. The final girl is usually androgynous. She usually has
Huh.
like some masculine qualities. Sometimes they have like even androgynous names, all that sort of stuff. So she's
It's
like,
crazy.
yeah, she's like at face value, they're women, but in reality, they represent men. They represent masculinity. So at the end of the movie, men are identifying with men. So it's not about female empowerment at all. It's actually about punishing women for the gains they made during the civil rights movements or the feminist movements of the 70s, and to remind women that they need to behave or they'll be punished. So that's the final
Holy
girl.
crap.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it is not a feminist icon at all. Like Clover did not write it as a feminist icon. It was like pointing out how this is still very much about violence on women's bodies and silencing women. Like it's still very much about that, even though it looks different. Um,
Oh,
so that's kind of how I got interested in the final girl, because like as a young undergrad, I was in love with horror, and I heard the term final girl and I assumed it was like a feminist thing. I was like, yes, we can make it to the end. We're the final girl. And then when I finally like read the work and was struggling with it, I was like, but she's not, this isn't a good thing. Like we're not, this isn't a
yeah.
positive thing.
Yes.
So I've always kind of been stuck with it because for me, it feels like it should be a term of empowerment. And I'm sad that it's not. So that's where I'm stuck going back to it all the time because it feels like it's and people use it like in an
Yes.
empowering way.
Yes. Oh, I mean, you're throwing me for a loop right now because this is the first I've ever heard of that theory. And it makes, unfortunately, so much sense, right? This idea, no, you're still in the man's world. Like, this is who's holding the pen and paper here, right? Like, you
Mhm.
are, the woman is not in control. And in fact, it's at the beck and call of the patriarchy, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I had never thought about these things of like the phallic nature of, XYZ, of like the weapons they choose to use, or the woman that lasts till the end is perhaps more masculine, perhaps has a masculine name or an androgynous name, or what have you. I had never thought about that, but like I'm
Yeah.
thinking about all of these final girls in my head right now. I'm like, oh God, that is true.
It's so
You know,
and she's given so Clover argues that the character is given characteristics that would be considered traditionally masculine. So
Mhm.
she talks specifically about the gaze, right? So the final girl is like the detective. She's able to investigate, she's able to see things that other people can't see. So that positions her in like the the masculine character. Um, because those are characteristics that are traditionally assigned to men in film.
Yeah.
Um, and it even starts with like Psycho, right? Psycho is considered one of the first instances of a final girl with Lillian Crane, but also right, like she's not sexual like her sister. She's not Marion Crane, who we
No.
see in the bra and
Yes.
panties, right?
Yes.
She isn't ogled at in the same way that Marion Crane is, right? She's covered up, she's the detective, she's like the one solving the crime, and at the end she's able to see, right, who the mom that the mom's dead, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, like so the final girl takes those characteristics of masculinity, right, to kind of reinstate the patriarchy, according to Carol Clover, according to her work.
Sure. No, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I
And
think that that's the controversial part. Like, I don't want folks to be mad at me, because I love the final girl and I love
no.
the feminist possibilities of the final girl, but the theory itself was not about that.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
I think that that's important to mention. That's just like fact. That's just what happened. But the way people interpret it, and if women reclaim this idea of the final girl as something empowering and changing that narrative, that's fucking amazing, right? Like this idea of, right, like being like, hell no, we're not, no, I don't want that to be the last line of the show, right?
Yeah.
Like I want this to be rewritten in a way. So you're
Yeah.
right there, that was what Clover said. um and makes, unfortunately, interesting points of like, oh my God, I never thought about it this way. You're absolutely right. um and again, in like, I feel like it instills this frustration and this fury of like, damn it, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
we didn't even get those movies.
Yeah. But
You know what I mean?
I think you're right though that people, especially women, have like appropriated this term to use it as a way to make space for themselves in horror fandom, right?
Yes.
So I do think that in at the beginning this was a term to point out, right, how the gender dynamics are still fucked up in horror films.
Yeah.
But the way that horror fans have used it to make space and to enter the conversation and to be fans like that, I love. And I think that that's
Yes.
also one of the things that keeps drawing me to it, right? Like we identify with it, we identify with the final girl a lot. And whether that was the intention of the filmmakers or not doesn't matter, because that's kind of our agency as audience members. We can do whatever we want with the text. And
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited for this conversation right now. This is going to be so fascinating. I'm really excited to dive into this. Okay. So, Orquidea, do you remember it? Were there any final girls that stood out for you, that kind of introduced you to the concept of the final girl growing up?
My my favorite final girl is Laurie Strode from Halloween. Like
Yeah.
she's just Jamie Lee Curtis is the classic
Come
final
on.
girl. Yeah, it's she just does everything so right. Like she's entertaining, she's smart, she's loving, like she's a good friend. She smokes
Yeah.
pot, right? So I think even in these
Right.
moments, like she does things that are bad or bad girls, right? And
Yeah.
she still kind of makes it to the end. So I love her for sure. Um, Hellraiser is one of my favorites. And the final girl in
Ooh.
that, she rarely gets mentioned, and I forget her name. Wait, I wrote it down. Kirsty Cotton, because I always forget her name.
That's okay.
Uh, yeah, so she's one of my favorite because again, like yeah, she was just really smart and resourceful, and it's so nice to see beyond the damsel in distress. So I think that that's what's appealing about these characters. Like they they do something, like they do something, and like
Yeah.
that taking action is just yeah, makes you want to yell at the screen like yeah, you do you kill them.
You relate. You
Yeah,
relate, like you mentioned, so hard, and you want to feel tough like
yeah,
they do,
yeah.
you know?
And who's the other one? Oh, so this is technically not a final girl, but it's a final boy. Fool
Love it.
from People Under the Stairs. Have you
I've never
watched
seen,
them?
oh my gosh,
Okay.
no.
Wes Craven is
Okay,
amazing. So People
yes.
Under the Stairs came out in the 90s, early 90s,
Okay.
and it's about it's about gentrification. So it's this white landlord family and their husband and wife slash brother and sister, and they kidnap children, and they also are landlords of this black neighborhood.
Mhm,
And it's all about, white respectability. So these
mhm,
people seem like respectable and wealthy, but once you go in, you see kind of the depravity and all this sort of stuff.
right.
So Fool he's a kid that's trying to get money for his mom that's dying of cancer, and so he and some two adults break into the house, and then he gets stuck in there. So he has to find his way out of the house, and it's it's a great movie about gentrification. It's a great movie about um, racism in the U.S. And yet you have this character that survives until the end of the film and liberates other characters. And he's a black boy, right? So it's kind
Ugh,
of
yeah,
groundbreaking. Um,
yeah,
but it follows a very similar format, right? Like he's able to see things other people can't see.
yeah,
He's like the good kid, right? He's trying to help his mom as opposed to being in a gang. So he's kind of like has some similar characteristics to the final girl, but
yes.
it's it's a POC, which is rare for the final girl. Very
And
rare.
can you talk more about that too? I think as we dive deeper into this idea, um, uh, in your experience, right? Like, just even just growing up as a fan of horror, right? How are BIPOC individuals typically represented in the world of horror?
Not.
Say it
Not.
again for the people in the back.
Not represented.
Mm.
Um, so one of my favorite subgenres of movies is when we don't make an appearance, but our culture does. So when there's like, this is a native burial ground. So we don't see an indigenous peoples, but it's cursed
Yeah.
because of that. Or
Mhm.
there's brujeria involved somehow, or stuff like that. So when we're not even in the movie, we're not on screen, but we're
Mhm.
still vilified. I love that subgenre.
Super
Uh,
fun.
but
Oh.
yeah, especially like so the final girl exists mostly in slashers, which exists mostly in the suburbs in the US, which are white areas historically because of redlining, because of gentrification, white
Mhm.
flight, multiple things.
Mhm.
So by the 70s, you had these white spaces again. So horror movies started delving into, the dangers next door. So it wasn't going to be POCs, it was going to be other white people or white monsters or, eh, like Poltergeist, Native Burial Ground, was kind of how they were going to keep creating these narratives. Um, so that's how you end up with a lot of white movies in the 80s, because they didn't have to rely on BIPOC to create horror. It was each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh God. Crazy. Just crazy stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Like it's insane. It's really freaking insane. Oh my God. And I also love how you answer the question with just like, yeah, we aren't represented well, if any, if we're there at all.
Yeah. I
We're
I
always first to
highly
die.
I highly recommend Horror Noir, the documentary. It's
Yes.
super, super good. Yeah.
Yes.
And it
Times
gives
a
you all that
million.
history of like it talks specifically about black representation in horror,
Yeah.
but it yeah, it's very similar for Latinos and for other racial ethnic groups. Yeah.
Definitely so. Definitely so. Everybody check that out. I will link that too. Just some brilliant stuff in
Yeah.
there. And you're right, everything you said, absolutely. It's just such a complex, especially I think what's so crazy, right? And I actually think we talked about this with Domino Rene Perez when we were all talking with each other about
Mhm.
some stuff. And ironically enough, who goes to the movies to watch all of these horror films? Latinos,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
BIPOC groups, right? It's like, hell yeah, every time, whatever horror movie, we are there giving them our money. Like we are always there. We are diehard fans for this
Mhm.
stuff. And yet it is so rare to see a very, I hate using the word accurate or culturally accurate or just respectable, but it's rare.
Yeah.
I think that's why, like, and don't get me wrong, there are so many horror films out there doing it right. Let me just say that. Like, there really are. Of course, they're written, directed, produced by BIPOC individuals, but like, I think Orquidea, like, when I saw uh, Jordan Peele's Get Out for the first time, I think I left my body. Like, I think I ascended into like a different plane.
Yeah.
Um, I really liked that movie, and I think it was finally something so exciting, as we talked about at the beginning of this episode, right? Showing the parallels of injustice and racial inequality, racism, this our history in America, right, with horror. Um, and I think, and I definitely don't claim to, like, obviously, i'm I'm not a black individual. I don't identify as African American. But I felt so much for this idea of being the one that is the terrifying one.
Yeah.
Right, like as you mentioned, the final girl is more often than not in the suburbs, um, where gentrification happens, XYZ, right? We are the scary ones, we are the different ones, we are the ones that they want out,
Yeah.
right, get out, right. And I was just so excited. I was like, oh my God, Jordan, like, yes, go off, keep making these, please keep making these, because they're so amazing. And I was excited. I was really excited.
Yeah.
um
And so folks write about Chris as a final girl. which is kind of interesting, right? Because it's a term that started to talk about this completely different thing, and now we're
Yeah.
using it to talk about Black representation and Black survival, really, right? Because that movie was about Black survival and making it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I'm not sure what to do with that. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if Clover's definition of it is just no longer applicable because
Right.
people have just done so much with the term that it
Right.
just has so many different meanings now. Because yeah, like that movie was so powerful and resonated so much because we weren't the monsters, you know. BIPOC people weren't the monsters.
No.
Black stories weren't terrifying. Black experiences were terrifying, right? Like what they were experiencing was terrifying. So the
Yes.
monster was so obviously different, and it was so understandable. Like I can understand white liberals as monsters. They are terrifying. So yes, like I am with you and I feel the fear too. And
Ooh,
I think its ability to do that was just, it was so intentional, right? Like
so intentional.
his audience was not us. His audience were Black people,
Yeah.
which is why it works, right? It
Yeah.
works because he was very intentional with his imagery, with his sound, with everything, because he had
Every
an
little thing.
audience in mind. Yeah. And we're not
Yeah.
it. And that's totally okay. That's why it
Oh,
works. Yeah.
yes. And we're still loving
Yeah,
it.
so
Filling
much
up the
so.
seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Oh
think
my gosh.
I don't know if you've seen Huesera yet, the Michelle Garza Cervera movie.
No,
It
no, I haven't.
translates to Bone Woman. It came out last year. It's a Mexican horror movie. It is one of the best movies I've seen in like recent history.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but like some of the most terrifying scenes were like just family relationships,
Oh,
or like the mom being like, you know, yes, te pasó el tren. Like, what do you want? Or, you know, why do you want kids now? You know, you're going to be a horrible
mm,
mother. It's like a lot of like generational trauma. So I feel
mm.
like it was in a similar way to what Get Out did. Like it was very much for a specific audience, and it resonates. Like it's traumatic.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm definitely gonna watch that. Maybe today.
I recommend. Yeah.
Oh
And it
my
kind
God.
of
I
is
mean,
the final girl in some ways too, if we're gonna
okay.
expand the
Okay.
term. Yeah.
And oh, I don't know. You're absolutely right. I think still expanding on this concept of the final girl and where it lies in terms of whether that's feminism or dismantling the patriarchy, what have you. um I think what's crazy about BIPOC individuals filling that role of the final person, the final girl, they're also that way in their generational trauma too, right? Trying to survive, trying to like just go day to day without like succumbing to all the weight that their ancestors had to endure for centuries. And I think that's what makes it so wild in the world of horror. Like, sure, you have your quote unquote stereotypical monster, right, that the whole horror movie is made after, but it's like, oh, but this person also has mental health issues. Their mom hates them. They can't have children. They're not looked at as pretty enough because they don't wear enough makeup, right? Like we
Yeah.
could go on and on and on and on. And like it's wild to see the many different layers of that for BIPOC individuals and just how many monsters, if you will,
Yeah.
occur for them on a daily basis. Like, yeah, sure, they defeated this one in this an hour and a half film, but just wait
Yeah.
till tomorrow. They have seven more. You know what I
Yeah. In
mean?
those instances, like I'd rather face Freddy Krueger than racism at work, right? Like if that's kind of
Oh,
the two monsters that I'm facing, I'd rather face Freddy, right? Like, but uh,
all day, Orquidea.
honestly,
All day. Are you kidding? Are you
there's
kidding?
so Robin Means Coleman in her book Horror Noir has the idea of the enduring woman to talk about Black women in horror, and she talks about Pam Grier, for example. And
Mm,
she says, you
mm,
know, Black women aren't allowed the luxury of being girls, right? So Black women are sexualized from a very young age, all that sort of stuff. So they don't get girls, they get women, and at the same time they don't get to be final girls because there's no final happy ending. there's, they endure it and they defeat one monster, but then they have to endure the rest of racism or the rest. So um, their concept of enduring women really kind of points out what's missing with Final Girl, right? Or how Final Girl is such a white concept at its
Mm.
root, that it kind of doesn't talk about all these other real monsters that real people face, right? Because it's kind of a fantasy of white femininity that, yeah, we defeat one monster and we're all okay. It's just like, oh, it's a little more
Amazing.
complicated.
Wait, sometimes you got to live with your monsters forever,
Yeah.
friend.
Yep.
They're there. You live with them, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what it is. Oh my gosh. Also, great book linking that. I need to get my hands on that. I've only ever seen bits and pieces. I've seen people do reviews on this. It's great.
It's
Great
such
work.
a good book. It's such a
Great
good
work.
book. And I remember I was at the University of Michigan when she was there, and I met with her to talk about the book because it had just come out or something like that. And I was just like, this book's amazing. Like, it's groundbreaking. It's beautiful. I love it. And she's such a genius. She was just like, yeah, I was working on another book project, but something happened and it fell through. So I had this and I just wrote this book. And I'm like, you're a genius. You're
I
like,
already
some
had this
people
whole
are just
thing.
so smart. So I was like fangirling
Amazing.
hella hard because, yeah, like, how do you
Yes.
just have an amazing book in your back pocket? You're just smart.
Just transformative. And it transformed so many people's lives. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, holy crap. Like somebody had to put it into words.
Yeah.
And she did.
Yeah. Yeah.
She did. Oh my god. That is crazy though. Now you've really got me thinking too about this concept of the non-binary world, I guess,
Mhm.
of the final girl. Also this idea of, I hate using the term marginalized groups, but like, like they're marginalized by society, by other outside forces, how they all kind of share in this final girl trope, simply because they are otherized. Um, I don't know. I think it's so complicated. It's so complicated. And then you bring in this idea too of the idea of sexuality,
Mhm.
right? Which you mentioned too at the beginning, right? Typically, the quote unquote sexy women, the ones that have sex on TV are sexualized, whatever, what have you, die first,
Mhm.
um, die almost immediately. It's very rare that you see them as the final girl, for example, and that's been a pretty common thing. I think. I mean, we can speak to ourselves as Latinas in horror. Um, but why do you think that sexualization and what comes of it exists, Orquidea, in horror narratives or horror movies specifically?
I think there's there's an interesting relationship between violence and sex in in media generally, not just horror. Like, even in the news, right? Like, we see a
Mm,
weird relationship between these two things, in the way women are sexualized, or the way gendered violence is kind of explained away because women were wearing something or were saying something or were in public, right? And they kind of, so this discourse that women that are sexual deserve violence exists beyond horror. Horror has just perfected it, like, in
mm,
visually. And Clover writes about how in slashers this was a response to women's liberation movement, right? And women's open about their sexuality, women's ability to kind of own their sexuality, in the
mm,
60s and 70s, right? So it was like, fine,
mm,
if you're going to be sexual, then you're going to be punished for it. So what you saw in these movies was women that were overtly sexual received really violent deaths. If you watch slashers, so men are usually receive shorter death scenes or off-screen death scenes. Women
yeah,
have much longer death scenes with um, more noise, right? That
yeah, yeah.
verges between, like, titillating, right? Like orgasmic versus death, right?
Hmm.
So even in that, women were represented in a certain way.
Yeah.
The final girl kind of gets to step away and not be sexualized until like, I think it's changed significantly in the 2000s, with movies like
Yeah.
It Follows, even
Oh my
Scream,
gosh.
right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
Scream, there was more. She had sex and it was
Yeah.
okay.
She did,
Um,
yeah, she's fine.
yeah, she survived 20 movies later. She's fine.
What do you
Uh,
know?
so I think it is changing, but I do think that there's elements of sexuality that are still considered taboo. So she has to
Mm,
be in a committed relationship. It can't
mm,
be like a pleasurable sex scene, right? Like it can't be like she's enjoying like there's still these regulations. Queer sex is still kind of in the out, especially to men, right? We can see two women, but we can't see two men in horror.
never.
So all of those things are still excluded. Um, and then like women of color are already seen as overtly sexual, just the way
Mm,
they're talked about, the way they're represented. So it's
mm.
kind of like in a horror movie, it's even more jiggly. Like I don't even know
Oh,
how to
no,
say it, but it is
there's
so
no
much
other way to
more.
say it.
So much more jiggles in
So
horror
much.
movies. So
Always.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
feel like I went on a
it's
tangent. I'm sorry.
oh, no, no, no. No, no, you did not. You answered my
Okay,
question.
okay,
It's disturbing. Like, it just, as you mentioned, right? It's just these just we just happen to be talking about it in a horror lens today.
yeah,
But it could be interchangeable with anything. Unfortunately, any genre.
yeah,
The news, as you mentioned, right? Real life. Like, I think that's what makes it so sad. Is, if you see violence upon women, Latinas, for example, BIPOC women, or queer bodies, right?
mm,
Violence against queer bodies, there's this idea that they deserved it because they were being sexual.
yeah,
Right, it goes all the way back to this idea of consent, to this idea of the Me Too movement, right? What were you wearing? How were you acting? Were you asking for it? It's absolutely fucking disgusting. It's
yeah,
horrible. It's really horrible.
yeah,
And it's scary to think um, you just existing um, could be seen as so sexual, so violent, so wrong.
yeah.
Um, you know?
And there's a what the hard thing about horror is that we're asked to watch this extreme violence on women's bodies,
Yeah.
expecting a payoff, right? So she'll defeat the monster at the end, she'll get revenge, right? There's a whole subgenre of rape revenge movies where women
Oh,
endure rape. Like we see these really intense, long sexual assault scenes. And because she, gets revenge at the end, it's supposed to be okay. And it's just like I'm not sure where the line is for these sort of representations. Like,
yeah,
at what point are they cathartic, and at what point are they we're just exploiting women's pain for the sake of exploitation? Because
yeah,
that's the power of horror. Like we watch death, we watch violence as a way to process it, right? So do we need to watch it to that extent to process and
yeah,
understand and empathize? I don't
yeah.
know.
It- you're right. I don't know if there's an easy answer. I think there are many cases where, I've seen like a really well executed film that actually didn't um, wasn't racist, wasn't disrespectful, actually showed a true experience. I've seen violence in it, and the director, writer, producer has been like, "Well, this wasn't to see a rise out of you, is for
Mhm.
what, as you mentioned, right, with Jordan Peele, this is for, or in a way, it's like, no, I want white audiences to see this. For example,
Yeah,
I want
yeah,
men to see this, cisgendered men to see this, because I want them to see um, what they do and how monstrous they are." And it's hard. It's like, absolutely, sure, but it goes back to this idea too of like, oh man, this is hard to watch though. What if I just want them to win for once? Or what if
yeah,
I just want them to have a really lovely day and not have to worry about this insane violence being brought about them, to them?
yeah,
It's so complicated. It's very complicated. And it really sucks that, like, I don't know, that our stories, our narratives in horror, our points can't get across without violence happening, or like
yeah,
it, I don't know, it's so complicated.
yeah. And that's, yeah, like I know for the Get Out example, right? Like Jordan Peele changed his ending because the the country was changing, right? We went from Obama to Trump. Like we
Yeah.
he was like, I couldn't give the real ending, which
Mhm.
is what would have happened. He would have gotten arrested. He's like,
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. Like I just couldn't. So I think that there's ways in which filmmakers give us a break or are becoming
Mhm.
more conscious of when we need a break, right? Um, as non-white audience members, as audience members that might have experienced trauma, right? Like we
Mhm.
we want to see these stories. We love the genre, but it's exhausting to see violence on us all the time,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
without it being necessary. And I think it's the same
Absolutely.
way that people talk about like sex scenes or rape scenes. Like, why do we need them to be so explicit? Why do we need them? There's intimacy coaches, all that sort of stuff. I wonder if we need something similar for violence and like racial gendered violence, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just a lot. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in, I think. I don't know. I mean, okay, like say obviously I know I'm sure you're gonna make a film one day. I have no question in my mind, Orquidea, and it's gonna be so good. And I would love to help you in any way if that ever happens. Just gonna throw that out there. But um, say you're making a film, right? And say you want this idea of the final girl that you envision, that you see, right? Whether that's just incorporating a very strong, powerful Latina, right, or however you want to. What is the ideal, not only representation of BIPOC bodies, maybe in a horror film, in your eyes, but maybe an accurate representation of the final girl as well? If you were creating this film, if you were behind it, like what would you like to see in those films?
That's a hard one. Oh, that's a really
Yeah,
hard one. I think so. I will say that the new Scream franchise did it well, in
yeah,
that we have two Latina leads. We have Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, who did
yeah,
amazing jobs, but the movie wasn't about their Latino-ness. It was just their
mhm,
life. And I love like
yeah,
that's what I want. Like I just want we have normal lives. We just happen to be brown, right?
yeah,
Like
right,
that's the
right.
difference.
Yes.
So that is refreshing to see that it just is, right? They're Latinas and
Yeah.
it doesn't need they don't need to wear sarapes or whatever, right? Like they just
Proof
are.
that, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they don't need to pull an ugly Betty to like be Latina enough, and that
Yeah,
is refreshing. I think for
yeah,
me, a final girl would be like an Ursula figure. She would be a bigger woman that
yeah,
just has been through shit and has survived, and now she like is kind of like a vigilante. Like Lola la Trailera is what I'm talking about.
yes,
I want Lola la
yes.
Trailera. Yeah, that's who I
I
want as a
love
final girl.
this. Can you explain that for people that may not know?
So Lola, I don't think I've watched any of her movies as an adult, but Lola la Trailera is a, she drives a trailer truck, and she fights against narcos, and she protects like usually her family gets in trouble or like friends, and there's yeah some so they're like narco action movies, which are drug
Right,
cartel
right,
action movies.
right.
uh yeah, and she's just like really sexy while she does it, but not in like a problematic way. She's just beautiful
Yeah,
and like kind of really loud and abrasive,
yeah,
and I love that. Like she's
yeah,
not she's yeah, she's not bland at
yeah,
all, and I love
yeah.
that. Yeah, so that's what I'm picturing.
I love it. I love that. And that's important to note too, I think. I don't think what Orquídea and I are saying is like they should never be like sexy. Like no. It's
Oh,
like it depends who's in control of that, right? Like who gets to see it that way, and like if she's owning it and loving it and expressing herself and feeling in the utmost control and power, right, in her body, in her skin, however she wants to, show that. That's
yeah,
hella amazing. That's
exactly.
amazing, right?
Yeah,
it's the sexiness being taken out of context as something just for men's eye candy, for example,
Or
or
people used it against her, right? Like
right.
Lola Trailera was, she wore short shorts and really tight shirts with big boobs. She was like,
Yeah,
she used her body, like she was very
yeah.
sexual, and I'm
Hmm.
sure she was sexualized by other people, but yeah, like there's nothing wrong with her being
No,
sexy.
not at
Yeah.
all. Not at all. That would be the sickest movie.
Yeah, can you imagine her going against like Freddy Krueger and being like, "I'm not gonna go to sleep. I'm just gonna chug this
Please.
coffee. I'll get you." I don't know. Like she just drive her trailer into her dreams and like run him over.
That's the tagline. I see it now. Like the trailer. Like, hell yeah. I see it. That sounds great. I would put all my money on that.
Lola la
Absolutely.
trailera va a Elm Street.
Not Elm Street.
La Elm Street.
That's so funny.
Yes. Oh my
I'm
god.
for it.
I'd
I'm
watch
for it.
it.
I'd watch it. I think it'd be amazing. I'd root for her all the way.
Oh my gosh.
All
And
the
then,
way.
we'd have Eric Estrada because he did the Chupacabra versus the Alamo movie. So he's already in for like a bad B horror movie. Oh, he'd be like the Border Patrol. She's trying to
I
get
love this.
in, and she's trying to cross the border to get into his dreams because she still has to be in the US to get in them for some reason. And Eric Estrada's
I
like,
love this.
no, you can't, Lola. Sorry, I'm just going
I
off.
love no, keep casting because this is making me very excited. Actually, hell yes, absolutely. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I'd buy the heck out of this film. I'm just
See, and if
saying.
Jenny Rivera was around, she would sing the theme song.
Ooh,
Right.
R.I.P.
I know, too triggering, sorry. Too soon.
It's okay.
But right,
It'll
she
always
would.
be too soon.
She would
Oh
totally
yeah,
sing the theme song. Yeah.
and it'd be so sick. Oh
Yeah.
my god, yeah. Yes. Yes. I'm for it.
Let's do it.
I'm down. Absolutely down. That sounds
Yeah.
so fun.
All dap
So
right
freaking
there.
cool. I love it. I'm for it. I'm for it. Okay. So, and obviously, I know that you have a huge affinity for this specific monster, right? Why do you think just the idea, the concept, however you go about it, of the final girl? Why is the final girl's existence so necessary, right? Like, why should the final girl keep being a thing? I guess you could say.
I think the new iterations of her are beautiful. I I love what people do with her and how people see her.
Yeah.
It really it feels like when Catholics take a saint and use it to represent something else and be like the Catholic Church is like, no, that's not what the saint is for, and they're like, but we're gonna do it anyway. That's what it feels like with the final girl. Like it has become a feminist
So funny.
icon. It is
Yeah.
a feminist icon when it wasn't supposed to be, and it wasn't in an early iteration. So
Yeah.
I think it exists because we as audience members have agency and have a
Mm,
voice in horror fandom, and that's why it should continue to exist and should continue to morph, right? Like
mm.
I want to see monstrous final girls. I want to see like really gory, gross looking final girls that make it to the end and then just like really are disgusting. Like I just want to see grotesque,
Yeah.
because women should be allowed to be grotesque and still
Yeah.
survive and still thrive and still be happy.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm hoping for. Like I'm hoping for like a really just more grossness and more like monstrousness in my final girl. I want them to finally come together and mix.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like seeing more of the human. It's like, let's see it. Let's see it in all its
Yes.
nasty glory,
Yeah.
right?
Which is why so the monster's so appealing because it has more human qualities than the final girl originally did. But now the final
Mm,
girl is becoming more human, right? She's more sexual, she does drugs, she has
mm.
fun, all this. So she's aligning herself with the monster who's sometimes, read as queer or asexual, all of those sort of in betweenness. So now she's moving to the in between.
That's
Yeah.
so cool. She exists in the same plane. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that
Yeah.
concept so much. That's so freaking badass. So cool.
I'm excited
Okay,
to
so
think about her more for sure.
oh yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, I think there's so many different layers you can unravel with her. That's what makes it such a fascinating character, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Do you think the final girl is scary, Orquidea?
I think the contemporary final girl is scary to patriarchy. I do
Mm,
think so
yeah.
because I think we're seeing final girls survive and survive kind of in their own way. They don't necessarily have to fit into gendered expectations as much
Mhm.
anymore in some of the films. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And it's so powerful too. I think to be scary, to be feared can be very fun
yeah,
sometimes,
exactly. And
you know?
yeah, I want to be scary.
Come on, me too.
Yeah,
Let's go. Like that's actually pretty. I don't know. I feel like we've kind of talked about this a little bit like in this episode, but we've had more discussions about it outside of this. The idea of I don't know, like Latinas, for example, existing in the academic sphere, right? And how complicated that is. It is very complicated. And I think what makes it so complicated, as you mentioned, right? You love teaching, right? You love, and I can relate to you on this. I love like the students. That is the best part. It is so exciting to see their little brains get excited
yeah,
and find passions and like open their mind to such cool things and let them geek out about silly things and monstrous things. Like it's so fun, so fun. But unfortunately, um, and sure, we like to think that things are changing, but the academic space was never created with Latinas in mind, right? Like
yeah,
it is very complicated. Um, and so like for example, right, something as little as like I'm going to wear red lipstick to work today, right, can leave room for people to like be racist towards you, or
yeah,
say you're too much, or say you're being too sexy, or if you don't wear red lipstick that day, they're like, oh, you're ugly, like you didn't try, you're not being a true Latina, for example, right?
yeah,
And I think that falls into this idea too, of scariness, of being feared,
mhm.
of feeling powerful in who you are and in your skin. And it's interesting how the academic space can be your own horror film sometimes, in its own way.
Yeah. Uh, I'm getting better at realizing because I always wanted to be in academia. I was just such a giant nerd because I thought it was a space where we read and we thought and we shared ideas. Like
Yeah,
we're just sharing ideas. We're not saving the world. We're just sharing ideas. Like it's a gift to be able to do that for a living. And yet people get so petty and protective over nothing
yeah,
because these were spaces not made for us. Like they don't want us in the room, whether they admit it or not. And
yeah,
they treat us like we don't belong in the room. And that can be really painful because I know we do.
yeah.
I know we do. So I have to remind myself that, yeah, these spaces were not made for me. They were not
Mm,
made for people like me. And that means that I don't owe them anything. I I will do for my students and I will do for my colleagues, right?
yes.
And I will nurture, these ideas and I will nurture spaces where people can have these conversations openly. But I'm not gonna fix a system that works perfectly, right? It is
Mm,
working perfectly. It is excluding us. So
mm,
the system, the universities are working exactly how they're intended to work,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
my presence there is an anomaly. They're trying
Mm,
to get us out because we're an anomaly, and we just have to do our best to not fight those petty fights and just be in these spaces and be happy in these spaces the best that we can because our presence is monstrous enough. And there's power in that.
yeah.
There's power in that because like
Absolutely.
we terrify them with our shine. Like that's what's so amazing. Like I have never been considered non-collegial and all of a sudden I am. I don't know why. I don't think
Yeah.
I am, but here we are. And I do think it's like we we have some innovative ideas and we have some new perspectives, and they don't like it. They
No.
don't like the change of the status quo. Yeah,
And I think it's beautiful that you mentioned just existing is rebellion enough, right? Smiling every day,
mhm,
teaching your kids, because they're the ones that, you do it for. And
yeah,
having really good friends and people, mentors, whoever it may be, colleagues that support you is so beautiful, especially when you feel like you're in a deserted island. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Having people that are just there. Um, and I love that. I love this idea that like your quote unquote monstrosity is the lighthouse for so many students,
yeah.
right? People that relate to you and want to be there one day, and
Mm.
it's amazing.
It's been really life changing. Like I've never been open about my mental health. I've never been vulnerable with my feelings
Yeah,
outside of my family, and even then, I'm very guarded.
yeah,
Like I don't, because I don't want to be. I don't want to make people unhappy. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, right? So I keep a lot in. But I've been trying to be better at being just myself and being okay with being myself. And so what I do now is I tell my students at the beginning of every semester, I have anxiety and depression. If my
mm,
tone is off, if something happens, check in with me. Like it's okay. And
mm,
I have found that to be so rewarding. And it was
mm,
terrifying, right? Like, because I
yeah,
don't know how they're going to react. And I don't know if already as a Latina, they might dismiss me, right? I'm not legible as an authority figure for some of them. And then I'm adding this to it, right?
vulnerability. Yeah,
Yeah. So now I'm even less of an authority figure. Possibly, right? That's the a risk. But it's been such a rewarding risk. They've been very comfortable with talking about their own mental health. They've been comfortable saying I need a mental health day. Like they've been comfortable being human with me. And
yeah,
that's a gift. Like I'm grateful for that gift.
yeah.
So I think that those are parts of myself that I always considered monstrous or
Mm,
weak, right? So I'm kind of showing more aspects of my monstrous self to the world, and it has been really rewarding. Um, so
yeah.
yeah,
That's freaking amazing. I'm so proud of you because I
thank
know
you.
how hard that, like you mentioned, not only just to have that self acceptance within yourself, but to be public about it and to show people that you do cry and show people that you feel. But I can only imagine like having a professor like you and being like, oh my God, like she gets sad too, or like she has bad days too. Like sometimes we think that these professors are just on a completely different plane, right? Like they are so like in the, I don't know, in space, like we could
Yeah,
never touch them, right? And that human nature I think is so relatable and so exciting and thrilling to see from young pupils. um I don't know, it just gives them a space, like you being vulnerable and showing your feelings and having these feelings and existing ultimately, whether you're aware of it or not, right, carves out these spaces for them too every day to be like, cool, I can have bad days too, and that's so freaking powerful. I'm so proud of you. And I know
mm,
that was hard. I know that
thank
was
you,
a very hard experience. So it's amazing.
thank you. Yeah, I I have found it to be really rewarding, and it's terrifying every time, every time.
Every time.
But it's still rewarding.
Mm. And that's all that matters,
Yeah,
day by day,
yeah,
day by day.
sure.
Okay. So I know, in case obviously like this episode wasn't enough proof that Orquidea really loves monsters. And we have, kind of interchangeably called the final girl a monster, but I'm
Mhm.
curious just to ask, right? Do you identify the final girl as a monster? Why or why not?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think in different ways. So I think the first iteration of the final girl was a monster because it destroyed liberation, right? It if the monster represented sexual liberation or queerness, it killed it and reinstated patriarchy. So to me, that's monstrous. But
Yeah.
now the way it's being used, it actually it reflects marginalized identities or it reflects marginalized individuals. So I think it's monstrous in a different way. It's monstrous to the status quo and to the
Yeah.
establishment, which is the way it should be. We should be
Yes,
monstrous to them. So
absolutely.
I like the flip. I like the way it's been. She's has been like reappropriated and just shifted into something so powerful and so
Yes.
long lasting, right? Like we're talking from the late 60s, early 70s. No, the theory's from the 90s, but it's a character that's been around for a while. I can't math right now.
No,
40
you're
years?
fine. I trust you. You could have
40,
said anything.
40-ish years.
Like, yeah.
I just have to remember I was born in the 80s, so if it's from the 80s, it's like 40-ish years.
There you go.
Yeah,
Math.
math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool. It's so cool to have these multiple levels of monstrosity, I think.
Yeah.
It's human, as we mentioned before. It's great. It's relatable. Because we feel that way. There are multiple layers of monstrosity within us too.
Yeah.
It just depends.
And that's what makes it so exciting. Like, yeah, it's just they're so beautiful because they're so malleable, they're so changeable. Like they otherwise they're not gonna exist. Otherwise they're not monstrous anymore. So they
Exactly.
have to relate to us in one way or another. And
Yeah.
yeah, that just makes them amazing.
So much more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Who
Yeah,
wants boring flat monsters? No.
buddy. You kidding? Come on.
Yeah,
Give us perspective.
exactly. Some nuance in these characters, please.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, let's pretend say you were talking to, a class full of your students. What would you tell them, or how would you tell them, why would you tell them that monsters are so important? Like, why should monsters stories be told? Why should discussions around monsters exist?
Monsters are a way for us to understand the world, each other, and ourselves. Like we use them to think about humanity. Uh, that's they're our necessary foil, right? Like
Mm,
because we kind of deposit all the things that we don't want to be in them, but we also deposit things we do want to be and don't know how to be, right? So they're kind of these like spaces for us to process and for us to think and to dump into, so they can mean so many different things.
yeah.
Um, I so there's this great short story by Gloria Saldua called Puddles. I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't loved me some Gloria though.
Okay. So this is she wrote sci-fi and horror, and she loved horror and sci-fi too. Like Alien was one of her favorite movies, and that influenced like her theories on mestiza consciousness and all that.
Yeah.
So she has a short story where it's this young woman who's a waitress, and she notices that this man, I think it's a man, that after he leaves, there's a puddle, like a
Mm,
yellow puddle on the seat. And she talks about the man's like skin color, it's a little greenish, stuff like that.
yeah.
And so she finally decides to touch the puddle, and she gets contaminated. So she starts to morph and to turn. And there's more to the story where she's kind of
Yeah.
like dealing with her identity.
Yeah.
And by touching this puddle, she starts to turn into a reptilian figure. And it's this idea of like contamination by coming into contact with others or by being open, right? Because she started to be more vulnerable and have like conversations with him. So it was through this contact that she became monstrous. And at first she was terrified because she was turning into like lizard. But then she
Yes.
kind of saw the beauty in it, and she started to, lose her skin and all that sort of stuff. So this the way she writes about it is just like becoming a monster is a beautiful, painful process that
Mm,
you need to do in order to see the world in different ways. Otherwise, you're going to see it in the same way all the time. So
yeah.
now that she's turned into this monster, she's able to see others like her. She's able to create communities of people that are like her. So,
Yeah.
like, kind of by being a monster, we can identify other monsters and be in community with each other. Um, so that's what I would tell my students. Like, read that story, and how can we create communities of monsters that are supportive, um,
Yes.
as opposed to like tearing down.
That's beautiful. I love Gloria, man. Oh my
She's so
gosh,
freaking
that's
amazing.
beautiful. So
Yeah,
freaking amazing. And I love that you use that because I don't know. I can totally relate to that idea of like monsters help me empathize 1 billion%.
yeah,
I love being able to learn about other people in that context and see walk in their shoes, I guess you can say. And um I think it all falls into this idea too of loving yourself and being comfortable with yourself, seeing the ways that you change and ebb and flow and morph and
mhm,
become more monstrous, right? It goes all the way back to this idea of therapy and shadow work and looking at
yeah,
your younger self and trying to accept yourself, right? There's just so many avenues of accepting the monstrosity, like how it can help you. Um, and I love that. I love the idea of puddles. I was gonna say go touch a puddle, everyone, but that might be gross. Maybe,
maybe
maybe.
I don't know. Just uh, I don't know. We're still in COVID times. Like, don't touch any liquids in public. Maybe for now.
Yeah, maybe. Like you could, if you have boots on, you could go jump in a puddle, a
Yeah,
very shallow puddle.
yeah, I think
Um,
so. Go touch
or
some
maybe just
plants. Touch some plants. You'll get a rash. You'll turn into a monster. It'll be awesome.
it'll be super fun. Like go run in the rain. Come on,
Yeah,
yeah. Like just live your best monstrous life anytime, any chance that you can, every chance that you can.
be full monster.
Full monster. Yeah. Okay. Last question, unfortunately, Orquidea. But let's say you're just chilling, right, in Arizona. Maybe you're just watching some scary movies, just having a good time. And all of a sudden, there's a knock at your door, and you open it, and there's a final girl. Now, I want you to decide which final girl this is. This could be an actual, final girl that you've grown to love in movies or in stories, or it could be one that's completely made up, right? Hasn't existed yet, maybe. What would you do in that situation? What would you say? How would you react?
I saw a final girl. I mean, I would probably not let them in because the monster's chasing them.
Like,
Like,
nope.
straight up, yeah, like a fan answer would be like, no, yeah, I'm not helping you. Because whoever, I'm gonna die if I try to help her. So that would
Gee,
be like my legit answer as a horror fan. I don't know her. Get out of here.
I'm dead.
Yeah,
So is she, I guess. But
yeah. No, she'll survive. It's in the name. I'm gonna
you're
get
right.
killed.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
You closing the door on her is just furthering her survival.
exactly, exactly. Because if I let her in here, I'm gonna get killed and she's gonna go out the window, and we don't need that right now.
It's been a rough day. Okay, everyone, we're
No.
not doing that.
Yeah, spring just started. We're just enjoying it. We don't need that.
Allergies. It's a lot. It's all a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah.
I love that. Which final girl do you think would ever come in contact with you, Orquídea?
I don't know any final girls in the Southwest.
Huh.
That's what I'm trying to like. Most are like in the Midwest suburbs or
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
um, I think I
I'm
would
so
want to.
interested.
I would want to bump into the one from Hellraiser.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, her or the Heather Langenkamp. What's her name from Nightmare on Elm Street?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because I just want to know what it's like to to work with Freddy and Pinhead.
Like ask them a few questions before you
Yeah,
close the door on them,
yeah,
like really quick, just if you could
yeah.
answer these really
What's it
quick.
like?
Okay, bye.
Are they nice in person? How does it?
That's so cute. I love it. I love it. I think it's weird. I don't want to say like I hope that you meet one day. That might be, as you said, kind of terrifying. But
Yeah,
I hope you can embody that. I hope in the future,
thank
always,
you.
forever, that strength and
Yeah,
ferocity that
yeah.
they do.
I, I think their curiousness, their
Yeah,
detective work. I like that aspect a
there you
lot.
go.
Yeah,
Always looking for the truth,
yeah.
and that's really cool.
This episode of Floaties for Krakens was written and recorded by me, Camille Maria Acosta. A monstrous thank you to Dr. Orquidea Morales for such a pleasant interview. And a big thank you to Michael Kosman for producing a stellar episode, and a huge thank you to Natalie Hedberg for designing such a phenomenal logo. And music for the show is also written and recorded by me, with a special appearance by my tata, Toby Acosta. Thank you all so much for tuning into today's show. It truly means everything to me. If you have questions or curiosities about the research or media referenced in today's episode, everything will hopefully be in the description box. And you can find us on our website or our socials, links in the description as well. Anyway, thanks again for being here, everyone. And just a reminder, it's okay to be afraid of the monster, but it's also okay to love the heck out of it too. Keep being monstrous and keep shining bright.